Welcome back to the Budget Gamer channel, where we bring you critical and in-depth reviews of just about every indie game we can get our hands on, and today we're going to be taking a look at Odysseus Kosmos for the Nintendo Switch. And while this game isn't strictly new, per se, it actually took a couple of years to put together all the chapters and get it all out together as a package. It is new to the Switch. And if you are a fan of point-and-click genres, or a fan of sci-fi in general, this one might be one you'd want to take a look at. Because as the main character, who is a somewhat lazy but very gifted mechanical technician, he is the only passenger aboard a very particular spacecraft, with the sole job of conducting routine maintenance. And with other situational themes being the fact that Odysseus is orbiting right on the edge of the event horizon of a nearby black hole, you can imagine that throughout the 5 chapters of the gameplay, including the pre-chapter, there will be certain themes where a given astronaut may be experiencing time distortions for traveling too close to a black hole, just like a certain movie you may or may not have seen. But getting into the actual gameplay, playing as Odysseus, and actually even sometimes as his robot counterpart, you'll of course be wandering around the length and breadth of the ship trying to solve different situations. Mostly though, as Odysseus is just a maintenance tech, pretty much every single one of the gaming situations you'll find yourself in is going to revolve around repairing or fixing, or jury-rigging certain items and artifacts just to get the job done. As a lone astronaut that spent many years in orbit around a black hole, though, you can expect that some of the dialogue between this one human and one robot can get kinda loose at times. And sometimes it's almost hard to tell which one of them is the crazy one. As you work to find items, interact with artifacts in the game, and work to combine items to find out how they could possibly be used to solve whatever puzzling situation you're in, you'll also be experiencing a lot of back and forth dialogue between these two quirky characters. However, one note about the game's mechanics is unless you actually use an item, that item isn't used up and you do keep it in your inventory, which is a pretty strict diversion from most of the point-and-click titles I've played recently. Normally you'll have one item for one solution to one problem, and then it disappears and you never need it again. But for any old school fans of the point-and-click genre, you know how hard it is to manage items if you don't know if you need them or you don't know if you've already used them enough. And so do expect that there's an added, almost classic layer of difficulty with the ways problems can be solved. Of course, there's only going to be one solution, but because inventory items don't just disappear after they've been used once, sometimes they will be used multiple times, and you really will have to come up with some really ingenious solutions to some of your problems. The game's control scheme in Odysseus Kosmos is something that is worth some note, and for better or worse. At the bottom of the screen, you have all of your typical interaction functions, using the LZ and RZ triggers to kind of tab between accessible items, the L and R specifically to tab between exits to frames, and your look button, action button, and interact button. And other than these, you can of course combine items to do a little bit more in-depth solutions to certain problems. But while this is all pretty much par for the course for the point-and-click genre itself, there are some things that we will be noting in the critiques. Moving on to Odysseus Kosmos' presentation though. Visually, it is stunningly done, with all of the pixel work being really well done, all the way from the characters to the scenes to even the backgrounds and settings themselves. And the color work making the ship truly feel semi-lifeless and abandoned, combined with the game's musical and auditory portfolio, really give it a unique sense of sullen solitude and even a bit of creeping dread to keep you pressured through actually finding the solutions to the puzzles. Everything you do in the game is kind of half-hearted and just kind of sticking stuff together, so there is always that anxiety feeling of, is this going to work? And how long is this ship actually going to stay in the air? But moving back to the visuals for just a second, one thing that wasn't done quite to the standard of the actual pixel work were the character animations. Each character only has a couple of static animations that they move back and forth between for the entirety of the game. So if you're expecting the sprites to be anything much more than a chess piece, you're probably expecting a little bit too much. And a little note of critique for the audio portfolio itself. While the game's soundtrack is phenomenal, the garbled voiceovers of all of the characters in the game, well, that's going to be kind of a take it or leave it detail, but for me personally, I really don't appreciate just the fake garbled language. Actual voiceovers for just a couple of characters in the game would have been a great way to enrich the character from that overdose of reading, but fake voiceovers done with high quality sound actually distract from your ability to read the text while it's going on. And that does actually lead us into the critique section for the game. Odysseus Kosmos is actually fundamentally a pretty amazing old school point and click title. There are a lot of puzzles to solve, there are a lot of solutions in the game, whether they're room type puzzles or hands-on first person, and all but a few of the puzzles actually are something you can solve without taking massive leaps in fake logic. And so in that sense, the game does get mad props. But one of its biggest critiques has to be that control scheme. Having been a computer game, you could easily mouse around the screen and click on every sort of actionable item, and it was probably a lot more user-friendly. But on the Switch, we don't have a mouse, and we can't really even use the joysticks unless moving around the character's avatar. Other than that, we're forced into tabbing back and forth with the LZ and RZ triggers, making every single interaction with every single actionable item a pretty big chore. Not only that, every time you interact with an item, every time you do a look or an interact or a touch or try to combine something, there will be a bit of dialogue to go along with it. Which means that as the learning curve for how to even control your character and interact with it in-game is a bit high, that it becomes a pretty quick imperative for the player to just stop reading the text. Because there will be so much dialogue in the game, and so much of it is meant to be witty that it just comes across as incredibly overwritten. And it might even lead the player to get frustrated with even attempting to solve the puzzle because there's so much to tab through with one button while you're trying to interact with items with another, and you're trying to use your L and R buttons to navigate around the screen while using a joystick to control the character. In all honesty, I've seen less complication in first-person shooters. But that does bring us to our next critique of the game, which is actually the game's writing. Odysseus Kosmos is obviously meant to be a bit highbrow. It's meant to be a bit more cerebral comedy for probably a lot more on the nerdy end of gamers. Gamers who like sci-fi, who like to theorize and fantasize about space and time and quantum physics, but who also have a fair bit of self-loathing and maybe overeat just like the main character. And so while any one of these comic elements could be thrown in to enrich the game to a pretty good rate, having so much dialogue be so overwritten for every single interaction of the character makes it just indigestible. And like I said before, with the learning curve of even being able to manipulate the puzzles, the first thing a player is going to want to do is tune out all the text. But taking a step back and looking at Odysseus Kosmos as a whole package, again, it is a pretty well done retro-style point-and-click adventure. And even if you do tune out all of the dialogue in the game, you can still probably make your way through fairly easy, except for in the later chapters where some of the puzzles do get a bit dialogic. And so while the frustrations of the control scheme of the game might chase away a lot of players pretty quickly, and while the overwritten dialogue might get a little boring fairly early on in game, with all the different scenes, with all the different scenarios, and just the quality of the pixel work and the audio, as well as the in-depth nature of the huge variety of puzzles in the game, if you're willing to push past those two flaws, you might be able to actually have a pretty good experience with Odysseus Kosmos. But if you are in the mood for a new point-and-click adventure and this one didn't quite suit your palate, feel free to check out the point-and-click adventure playlist on the Budget Gamer channel, because we've already reviewed a couple dozen of them, and there might be one that's a little bit more suited to your tastes. But anyway, that does about wrap up the review of Odysseus Kosmos, now on the Nintendo Switch. So if you enjoyed the review, or especially if you found it helpful, feel free to throw us a like or a comment to show your support, and don't forget to click that little bell icon when you subscribe to stay updated with the latest content, because there are new and unique indie games coming out literally every single day. And so whether it's an easy hard pass or an absolutely unforgettable gem, chances are, if it's on the Switch, you're gonna find out about it right here. But anyway, this has been the Budget Gamer, so as always, thanks for watching.